Hey guys, it's me, Stefan, your GM. Welcome to the second episode of the Mighty Empires instruction videos. In this video, I'll be covering edicts. Alright, well let's start things off with the orders phase. And this is the first phase of any campaign turn. It's where players get to assign strategic orders called edicts to the hexes in the kingdom. Now, the edict is assigned to a hex, and it will determine what that hex contributes to in your kingdom for that turn. Now, an edict is issued to the entire hex, and it automatically applies to all of its special features as well. Now, we'll take a look at special features later, but they can provide certain bonuses to the player and their kingdom as well. But once you issue a hex, or an edict rather, to a hex with a special feature, it might be that the edict sort of overrules the benefit that the special feature provides. So it is pretty important to keep that in mind a little bit when you are issuing edicts to the hexes in your kingdom. Now, most of the time, you don't necessarily need to issue edicts to any of your hexes because the default action for all the hexes in your kingdom is support troops. Now, what support troops? It's a non-edict sort of thing. It's what the rulebook calls the default state of a hex, and it's where the hex will provide support for your armies, which means that the more hexes you have providing support for your armies, the bigger your armies can become. So that's also important to keep in mind. Also important to keep in mind, if you issue an edict to a hex, it will cease to produce any support. Now, we'll take a look at support a little later when we're talking about creating armies. But yeah, another thing to keep in mind. Now, special features in the hex will continue to provide entitlements as normal. We'll talk about entitlements later when we're talking about creating armies as well. This is where you will be able to field more exotic troops. So, for every hex that you have, you can issue an edict. So, it doesn't have to be one edict across your kingdom, across the board. Every hex can have a different edict. So, what kind of edicts are there? There is civilization, there is industry, there is war footing, there is loot, and there is raise. Civilization is where the hex, instead of support, will provide you 2 points of power. Now, a condition is, as you can see to the right, the hex must contain a city or a capital. Now, you might ask yourself, what are power points? Well, this is the main point system that will determine ultimately the winner, because at the end of the campaign, the game will look at the players, and the player with the most number of power points actually wins the campaign. Off the bat, this seems like a pretty powerful edict, but do keep in mind, if you do this, your hex with your capital will cease to provide support, and your capital and its hex are the biggest provider of support in your kingdom. Let's take a look at industry. So industry pretty much sets all of the workers inside of a hex to the job of just creating raw material, right? So it says here, the production of ore, lumber, and farming starts, all to provide your kingdom. Empty hexes produce 1 point of production when under an industry edict, and some special features might increase this. An example is a mine or a deep mine. And these industry points are used to generate, at the end of the day, power as well. Later on, it will explain that every 3 points of industry, of any type of industry, doesn't really matter what. It can be ore, it can be lumber, it can be farming, it can be a combination of anything. But per 3 industry, you will gain another power point. So this is another way for your kingdom to acquire power. Next up is war footing. Now, war footing adds +2 to any unit recovery rolls made by your army for the duration of your turn. So this means that when your army is suffering casualties and you're going to have to roll on the recovery roll chart at the end of the game, you actually get a +2 bonus. Now, a condition is that this hex must contain a town, city, or capital. So basically, you're sacrificing any war support or troop support, and that hex will now provide +2 bonus to a recovery roll instead. Can be very useful if you expect you're going to take an L. Can be useful to have in your back pocket anyway. Seems like a very interesting one to me. Then there's loot. This is where you send off agents to scour a hex for useful resources. You're basically just plundering the hex, right, for any items or, valuable resources that you might use. However, there is going to be a risk of damaging the local industry and settlements, or even alienating the abused population. People generally don't like it when your agents come in, and start stealing their stuff all for the greater good. So it might be that they're actually going to revolt. It might even result in you losing that hex. There's a extra table. We'll take a look at that in a second. For now, let's take a look at raise. This is where your agents are being even less nice, and they start to pillage and burn, methodically trying to inflict as much damage on the local industry and the settlements as possible. It's pretty much entirely focused on destruction. You will lose control of the hex, as it will be raised at the end of the turn. It's not something to be used lightly, but it is there to be used nonetheless. So here I pulled up the table risks and consequences for raising and looting, so we can take a look at what the possible risk of looting a hex or even raising a hex might entail. So let's start off with looting a hex. And whenever you do this, you scour it for resources, but then you have to roll a d6 and check the chart. So if you roll a 1, it says, the result is overzealous. The hex is being treated as it was raised, as your agents are being way too overzealous, and they're pretty much just raising it, right? So then there is 2 to 3. You incite a rebellion. The local populace really isn't liking you taking all their stuff, even if it's for the greater good. They don't care. And after you scour the hex for some resources, the hex becomes neutral. 4 or higher is suffer in silence. You're able to loot the hex. The population really doesn't like it, but they're, suffering in silence. They don't particularly feel frisky, and they just keep their heads down and pray that it doesn't happen again. Right, so then there's raising. So raising pretty much automatically means you lose the hex. There's no two ways about it. Now, any feature in the hex is reduced or destroyed. This means if you have a city or capital or any other kind of structure, it is either downgraded to a lesser state, or it is completely destroyed outright, and you lose the effects of that pretty much permanently, unless you rebuild it, but that costs resources and time. So any defensive terrain features that you're able to build or that are already in the hex are lost as well. So pretty much this thing is just stripped completely, and it loses all function. It's empty. Now, you might ask the game master, knowing the risks of raising or looting in a hex, is all well and dandy, but what are the actual benefits that I can get out of it? Well, let's take a look at that right now. Here I pulled up the table with the benefits that you can possibly get. And let's just start from the top. Looting an empty hex will get you 250 extra support. Now, support, as I've explained before, goes to your army creation. The more support you have, the bigger the armies that you can create. Now, this is made with Warhammer Fantasy in mind, but for the purposes of the 9th Age, just double any amount of support that you might get. And that's what you're actually getting, for this campaign with the 9th Age. So instead of 250 extra support, you will get 500 extra support. And this pretty much just translates into extra points you can spend on your army. And then we can pretty much just go down the line. So looting a capital will get you an extra 1,000 points because we're doubling it. Remember, for the next D3 turns, a city will give you 1,000, a port will give you 1,000, and so forth. It's pretty much all the same until you come across the fertile fields, mines, deep mines, woods, and deep woods. These will also give you a point of ore or lumber. So that's something extra when you loot those. Of course, there's a risk that you'll lose those, so, keep that once again in mind. Then there's the Wizard Tower. It will gain you an extra support, but then you also have to roll on the chart. If you roll a 1, you could possibly lose a character as he's lost in the Wizard Tower or something, or the wizard is really mad and zaps one of your characters. 2 to 4, you might permanently gain a magic item. And a 5 and 6... is the same thing, but you get a magic item worth up to 50 points. Now we're doubling this because remember we're playing the 9th Age, so 2 to 4 is a magic item of 50 points, and 5 to 6 is a magic item worth up to 100 points. And then for an Arcane Ruin, it's identical to the Wizard's Tower. And then if you loot a tunnel, it's another 500 points there as well. So now let's take a look at the benefits of raising. And well, although raising doesn't really provide you as the player doing the raising a benefit, it's pretty much a way to just destroy anything that's on the hex, because you probably are thinking you won't be able to maintain control of the hex for long. So you're thinking, you know, I have control of it now, I need to raise it before a opponent takes control of the hex. That way he doesn't really have any great benefits going on for taking back the hex. It might even deter some opponents, thinking it's not worth retaking the hex anymore. There's a bunch of, you know, cloak and dagger sort of trickery going on here that you might use that for. So no real benefits to the player other than just destroying stuff so that other people don't get said stuff. But then we come to raising a Wizard's Tower and Arcane Ruin. Now here you roll a die again. As for looting, only on a 1 you permanently lose 1 random magic item in your army, and on a 6 you awaken the beast. That's something you really don't want. We'll take a look at that in a second. The same thing goes for an Arcane Ruin. So on a 1 you actually lose a recent advancement from a random character in your army. If the character doesn't have an advancement, he actually dies. Now an advancement is like sort of a upgrade for a character that he can attain if he, you know, fights in battles, he survives the battles, and he accumulates experience. We'll go into that later, but yeah, the risk becomes of losing such an advancement or even dying. So if you raise a hex that you conquer this turn, the character must be selected from the conquering army. Once on a 6, you actually awaken the beast as well. So what does that mean? Awakening the beast pretty much always means disaster, right? As you can see here on Appendix G, the beast awakens. It's an optional rule, but once I read through it, I thought it was brilliant, and I decided to use it in my campaign. So awakening the beast can happen in a different number of ways. You can conduct industry on a deep mine or deep wood. The idea is that all across the world of the 9th Age, there are these deep slumbering beasts. They're ancient, underground. Nobody knows they're there. But once you delve too deep and too greedily, for instance, you might awaken it. Same thing goes with the raising of a Wizard's Tower or Arcane Ruin. A particular beast that was slumbering beneath it did not really like that, and so you awaken the beast. Now what happens is the beast emerges and automatically raises the hex that it appears in. And then on subsequent turns, the beast travels 1 hex in a random direction, and it raises that hex as well. So the rampage continues until the beast is defeated in a battle by a player army. This is brilliant, right? We have to use this. So beasts are known to be drawn to nearby battles. It then reads further, sometimes moving surprising distances to appear on the battlefield unexpectedly. Now, reading further, the exact nature of the beast will be determined by the game master. So it might be a dragon, it might be a giant, it might be just a regular giant, it might be a huge mole monster, I don't know. Just use your imagination, but it will be a force of monstrous creatures, anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 points. So remember, we're doubling this, so 2,000 and 4,000 points. Examples are given. It's like 2 or 3 dragons, maybe 4 to 6 giants, maybe a giant demonic bloodthirster. You know, use your imagination. So a player will have to battle it in order to vanquish it, or else it will just continue to raise random hexes. Right, well, that does it for the orders phase. I hope everything was clear. I did try my best to make everything as clear as possible. So next video, I will be explaining army building. So see you guys in the next video, alright? Bye-bye!